And we are live, episode 205. We're actually live today because me and Rob's schedules were so fucked up. But anyway, it's one of those days where my week's fucked up. Rob's physically fucked up. Trent is stuck in a hotel somewhere in Queens over by the Long Island Expressway, or the Cross Island, actually. So it's one of those days. I'm Scott, the big guy Ferrari. Got Rob the Hammer Hammerschmidt, and our boy Trent Adams. How you doing, Trent?
Yeah, good to see you guys again, and always a pleasure to be on here. It would be a lot more fun to be sitting at my house as opposed to a lovely hotel in Queens. But hey, you got to roll with the punches.
Hey, Trent, last time you were on, and it's been a minute. Last time you were on it, didn't we give you a nickname? It was like A squared because for some reason
A squared or double A?
Double A. There we go.
Double A, I think. Right. Yeah. But imagine being a wall mate with Trent, and they must think this guy's crazy. He's talking to himself the whole fucking night. But no, he's on the Rugby Rant, so it's going to be fun. And this episode of the Rugby Rant is going to be different because God forbid we do the same thing and we're actually prepared for anything, which is half the fun of the show, right, Rob?
Yeah, exactly. What's the use? What's the fun of preparing stuff when you can just wing it and have a great time anyway?
Speaking of winging it, how about you talk about our Week 7 winner?
Yeah, well, I just want to mention we haven't had an update on Super Brew, but Super Brew is hot and heavy right now. A lot of leaderboards in contention. A few of the upsets have thrown some things into a bit of a whack, but Week 7 winner David Nationality won himself some great merch. Of course, he won a Rugby Rant hoodie. I'm wearing the actual tech tee that we got that I ordered from the Rugby Rant store, which you can order too. And interestingly, folks, not a lot of the teams have the merch out from Macron. You can order yours from the Rugby Rant if you like, and you get team pricing. So we pay what you pay on that tee store, and it's a lot less than what the you can get from the other teams. And there are 4 teams providing kit to their fans, and that's Old Glory, New Jersey, Free Jacks, RFCLA, and Seattle just had a big announcement last week. So some great kit. So congratulations to David. You'll be getting your hoodie soon. And I know there's some other hoodies going out. Some folks have taken a few pictures. As a matter of fact, we had a young man from the Hounds who is being gifted a hoodie by his father, who was the winner of Week 6. Yeah, so I'll be delivering that at the next match. But it's pretty cool stuff. His dad lives in Australia, so therefore they don't send to Australia. So we're getting we're getting some merch
sweet.
out. So
I do have to ask, Rob, have you had a stroke or are you drunk? Because you definitely called them the New Jersey Free Jacks.
Oh, I did.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm on some medication for a bulging disc right now, so it could have very well been.
So you're high on Percocets. Okay.
Yeah.
Don't do drugs, kids.
Muscle relaxers, lidocaine patch, everything else. Yeah. So I'm doing wonderful.
And speaking of team merch, I got my New York Exiles shirt on.
That's good looking.
Yeah, it's a great shirt, and if you can go on the website to all the team merch shops and buy it. Or what I like, actually, what they're doing is if you go to a match, they have the home and away teams merch there at the same tent.
Oh, that's cool.
So when we went to see New York at the home opener, they had New York stuff and they had Banshee stuff. So that way, whoever was attending, as far as fans, can get their merch immediately. And I love that idea. I know it's not practical for the MLR, but right now for the start of WER, it works. But yeah, shout out to our Week 7 winner, and we're actually going to kick off our lock of the week.
The Rugby Rant's lock of the week.
So I'm going to start first. Anthem is going to kick the shit out of NOLA. That's what I've decided. NOLA just can't get out of their own way. It's like somebody's tied their cleats together. I don't know what else to say. I honestly am flabbergasted at this NOLA team with all that talent and not being able to pull it together is disappointing. And Anthem is so close to a win. Like, I think is it that fortuitous that they're going to beat NOLA? I'm not sure, but that's my lock of the week. I have Anthem by 5.
Okay, Troy, what do you got? Trent, what do you got? Again, my Percocet's kicking in.
I was going to let you go next, Rob, because I was going to see what you went with, and then I was going to probably go the other one.
Okay, that's how it's going to be. Okay, I'm going to go with Old Glory over Seattle. It's going to be a tight affair, but I think it's going to be a 3-point match. But Old Glory has good defense, are physical, especially in the backs. And Seattle is just going through a rough patch right now. They're having difficulty finding consistency week in and week out. So I think OG is they're going to be at home. Seattle's traveling across the country, throwing their time off a little bit. I think that's going to play to Old Glory's advantage.
Well, that was one of the two I was looking at. I mean, even though I do have my San Diego Legion winning by 12, that's not my lock of the week.
12! 12!
Hey, I just want to put it out there. I am sitting 8th overall in the standings out of 108 on the Rugby Rant board. So I do pick up a few correct every now and again. My lock of the week would have to be New England hosting Miami. I think New England turned the corner a bit last week. And I think this Miami team just cannot seem to find itself. I was really high on them after the first couple matches this year, and it's just things they don't seem to be able to progress to that next level. So look at New England to take that one by, I'm thinking 10.
Yeah, I mean, just to go over my picks. So I have Old Glory by 3. I think Old Glory is going to win by 3. I think they're at home. I think Seattle's I know Seattle picked up the win last week, but I think Old Glory is due for one. The New England by 3. I think you're right. I think Miami seems lost. I think New England does put it together, but I think it's going to be closer. So really, I'm giving New England a home field advantage 3. But I'm up with Mr. San Diego Legion boy over there. I have San Diego winning by 10 against the Hounds. Just saying, and I'm a Hounds fan. But San Diego's rolling. So, I think I honestly think we all are kind of on the same page. Last week I went 4 for 5. The only match I got wrong was the Utah Free Jacks match. I had Utah winning big. I thought the Free Jacks were going to have a tough time. The Free Jacks came out and toughed out a really good win. So I'm not mad I lost on that one. You know what I mean? It was a good match to watch. But we are going to talk about an interesting topic today. If maybe you guys have seen, maybe you haven't seen, about 2 weeks ago, Scott Lawrence posted an interesting post on LinkedIn of all the social media pages you can
it's his social media choice.
Yeah.
Whenever he posts something, he posts on LinkedIn.
Yeah, and it was interesting, and we're going to talk about it. And I wish we had an official we could talk to, but I have a feeling they're not touching this one with a 10-foot pole. But before we get into that, you're going to hear a word from our sponsors. So like I said, we're going to be doing this. We're going to be talking about this topic that Scott Lawrence brought up, and I'm going to bring up his analytics here on the screen. I know it's going to be tough for some of you out there to see if you're watching on your phones and whatnot. But so what Scott wrote was, after the last home test series, we began to ask ourselves the question of, does a referee's origin and familiarity with the players lean towards more or less penalties? We decided to test this against the first few rounds of the MLR season. We found that USA referees blow more penalties against USA players at a faster frequency than Canadian referees do at Canadian players. I got to be honest, I'm surprised Canadian referees don't say sorry every time they blow a penalty anyway. They also saw that international referees are roughly numerically the same on international players as USA referees are on USA players. And they say Canadian referees generally blow less penalties on the whole.
I should hope so.
Players, if they're blowing players, we have a problem. But anyway, in this chart, I found interesting. If you want to go check out his LinkedIn feed, you can go find it. It's public. But on the bottom here, it actually shows average penalties versus starters and player nation. So it shows you the kit number and then it shows you USA in gray, or sorry, USA in blue, international in gray, and Canadian in red. And you can see Canadian flankers get penalized like fucking crazy, which is interesting. I wonder if it's just Lucas Rumball getting penalties all the time, Rob.
Wait, you got Rumball and Fletch, and you got Keaton. So I think you got a fair amount. And of course, there's quite a few, Canadians sprinkled throughout the league. So I think that's something that we'll talk about. But for those that can't see this too well, because it is difficult to see on screen, you've got, a couple different graphs happening in the upper left-hand corner. Basically what you have is the percentage of players, and it's number or shirt numbers 1 through 23, the percentage of players over the first 6 weeks that played in that jersey from, again, as Scott said, USA, gray is international, and red is Canadian. And then over on the right, if you slide to the right, another bar graph that looks similar, but this time, again, it's by position or jersey number. And it is the percentage of penalties called on that position, and it's broken down in the same way. So, in an ideal world, I think what we would see is the percentage of players and the percentage of penalties would be consistent. And so for like on the number 1 shirt, the loose head, it does look kind of consistent, right? Mm-hmm. And you go to the hookers and it does kind of look consistent, but as you start to scan through, you'll see that consistency is not at all positions. So we just need to keep in mind what this means. And, Scott's making a claim, and it'll be interesting to chat with you lads about, what we think about it.
Yeah. I kind of want to give you and Trent the floor first because I have a lot to say. So
give it to Double A.
All right, Double A.
Okay. Well, I think taking a step back from it, and I tried to look around a little bit to see how has this really been looked at before at a different level. And the short answer from what I could find is no. Nobody's really tried to take this deep dive analysis, which isn't surprising, right? Scott is obviously a coach who relies on analytics, and I think he's got a couple people now who are assisting him on some of this analytical, this data analysis that they're going through. What I did find was in reading, and I think Ben O'Keefe had a really nice article from about a year ago talking about the mentality of how he approaches games in the Northern Hemisphere versus doing games in the Southern Hemisphere, and how he approaches some of the international test matches that he does. And what he talked about was, when he gets to the Northern Hemisphere, you have a specific style of lots of mauls, a lot more scrum, a lot more set piece, whereas the Southern Hemisphere is going to be more flowing. And part of it when he's reffing it is that mentality. So now you take that to what Scott's analysis is, and you try and say, well, what does that mean? Where are these referees coming from? And then what is their background? With the international referees that we have, with the US and the Canada referees that we have, what is their background? Did they grow up and have exposure to a more Southern Hemisphere style? Did they have exposure to a more Northern Hemisphere style? And then the other part being is what is the North American style? Do we have a style yet that really makes it a certain way? So, I mean, I appreciate the analysis he's doing. I think that there's definitely some merit in it. But I think the other part is looking at the individual referees. If we were to go back when JP Doyle was doing it, what was that, about 4 years ago, it'd be interesting to see what his stats, for example, would be versus other people, because obviously he was an internationally recognized referee. So I think that would be the one context I would take, and I'd be interested to look at is what is the background of each of these referees. Like when Scott Green was there, his background, obviously Southern Hemisphere. What is the background of how they officiate, and is that impacting the way some of these calls are being made, as much so as the actual data itself?
Yeah, it's interesting, Trent. You mentioned the analysis that was done, and you mentioned Scott Lawrence putting a team together that does analysis. Jimmy Harrison's one of the best in the business just in terms of data collection analysis, breaking down game film, and that's who the U.S. uses at their disposal. For me, I look, everybody knows, if you've watched this show before, you'll know that I think the world of Scott. I think he's a wonderful coach. I think he's a visionary. I love the fact that not only does he have the vision, but he's willing to share that vision with the American rugby consumer. That being said, I think it's a little too early to do an analysis or breakdown like this. My question is why now? And it's not a critical question. I'm just wondering why now? Like, what was the point of this? We know that Rassi, for example, does things intentionally when he asks questions of the officiating crew. He does it with intent because he wants to put something in officials' heads to have a slight impact and gain an edge in the international game. And so whether it's in a test series or in a World Cup for that matter, he asks those questions with the intent of, getting inside the head of officials and other people that impact the game, other coaches, other players. I don't know that. I think it's obviously too early from July to be doing that now. And the sample size is not very big. I mean, it's 6 weeks. And to the point, like Scott sent me more specifics of the graphic that our Scott Ferrara put up was on the aggregate. So all the officials. Scott Lawrence sent me Cat Roach and sent me, so it'll look the same, but except it's specifically Cat Roach as well as Luke Grogan. And Luke has 4 games rough through 6 weeks. Cat only had 2. So if you look at those 2 screens side by side, you'd recognize that, having such a small sample size of 2 games, it's kind of difficult to say that Cat tends to be more harsh on American players than Luke Rogan. But that's what the data kind of looks like. But is 2 games enough of a sample size? Is 6 games on the aggregate enough of a sample size? And that's why I wonder why now? Like, why not let the season play out and have as big a sample size as possible? And so the last thing I'd say is, don't underestimate Scott. I've heard in circles that he's a Mensa candidate. He's just that smart, just genius level. So I know there's method to the madness. I just don't know what it is. I'm not smart enough.
Well, here's what I'll say. I think it makes sense, and you want to see again. I think Trent had a good point about the Southern Hemisphere versus Northern Hemisphere and that whole thing. But also, I feel like he's going to get data for the whole season. I think he's just showing us what the data looks like after 5 weeks, and just giving a quick analysis. It's one of those things where I think he's trying to push out what just they're looking at, right? What do we talk about? The number one thing that's wrong with USA Rugby, Rob? Lack of communication, a lack of some transparency. So to me, why not take a look at this? Because maybe, as you get more an in-depth look, you'll say, okay, well, we have, South American referees tend to penalize, flankers more. Why? What's going on? What are they seeing? Right? Why was Rob Hammerschmidt penalized by Federico Anselmi 7 times? Well, he was offside 7 times. Well, now I got to tell Rob, hey, we have Federico coming up this week. Make sure you're in an onside position. Stop fucking around. You know what I mean? And that doesn't mean that that's what's going to happen. But I think that's what you're looking for. How do you gain that advantage? How do you prepare yourself to go up and play and have somebody officiate? Rob knows I've talked about Scott Green a lot as an MLR official, and he called a very, very tight offsides line. And some teams couldn't adjust. New York was one of those teams that just couldn't fucking take another half a step back in the middle of a match. Don't really know why, but they couldn't. But you should know going into your weekly preparation, hey, we got Scott Green in the middle. He calls us for a lot of offsides. Make sure we're drilling down on taking another half step back. So that way we're not in an offsides position, right? Again, is the 5 weeks enough data to really look at analytics? I don't think so. But I think just to give you something, to show you something, it does make sense, Rob. I did speak to some people about this, and some of the how should I say this? The insiders I spoke to also talked and said sometimes you need to look at the fitness of the official in the middle. Sometimes you'll see an official call that offsides or that weird penalty because they're trying to catch their own breath. I thought that was interesting. I'm not gonna tell you who my source was who said that, but I thought that was very interesting.
Not gonna name names.
Not gonna name names, but what I will say is
they don't do that in New York, folks.
The source, yeah.
Snitches get stitches.
That's I don't talk, but I'll put it this way: the source is impeachable. I'll say that. So I found that to be interesting.
I was just gonna say, you know what was interesting? I did find the other thing I found, and you said that, Scott. I think that's really interesting take. The other piece I found in doing a little research on this was a university research paper done in South Africa on South African referees who referee the tier below Currie Cup down there. And it literally says exactly what you just said, which is that the fitness of referees directly impacting how they are refereeing games. And not saying that our referees are of a poor caliber or poor quality or whatever, but I think that is it's interesting that came from your source, but also was uncovered in a university research paper from 5-6 years ago done on South African referees who were analyzing.
And I mean, let's be honest. The lower levels, you're going to get people who are maybe older, maybe a little more out of shape. They do it on the weekends. So listen, I'm not saying that, but at the professional level, I think it does make a big deal if you're going to call that, how do I say this, squirrely offside to catch your own breath. You know what I mean? And I mean, our girl, Christina at Girl Meets Rugby says 50 plus matches to get a good stat comparison. Yes, that's true. But I think to go with the individual referee in the MLR is a little tough because, again, you see the disparity in how many of these officials get to be the center officials some of these matches. And talking with, the scheduling people, sometimes it's just a scheduling thing. It's not necessarily because of their ability. It's just where they are actually located, if they're centrally located to matches and who's available and stuff like that. So I think on the whole, doing this data on a USA versus international versus Canadian level actually makes more sense than maybe even on the individual level. Because like you said, with the Cat Roach data, she only has 2 games in the middle. That doesn't really help. That doesn't help you. That doesn't tell you much. Her first game could have been week 1, NOLA versus Anthem. And week 1s are always shitty,
Yeah, well, and that's, I think that point is well taken, because her first match was San Diego versus Anthem. Well, we know that
that was a big score, right?
Yeah. And Anthem is a heavy U.S. influence, right? So of course, when she takes that match and she calls penalties on the Anthem, that's gonna really bear fruit on that data graph, right?
Right. No Canadians on Anthem, no Canadians on Sabercats. So anytime the Sabercats and Canadians play, anytime they're playing, Sabercats are going to play Montreal Canadiens this week. Anytime the Sabercats and Anthem are playing, any penalty that goes against them doesn't go against the Canadians. So, is the Canadian stat as big of a deal as we think?
Right.
Should they be lumped in with international in that data line? I don't know.
Right. Now, I want to go back to your point, and I'm curious to hear both of your responses. So I get, and I'm not going to disagree, that Scott Lawrence and his crew should absolutely be looking at officials and breaking down this types of data, because they need to adjust their gameplay, their practice structure based upon this. And I'll just give you an example. Our good friend James Dealey, the MLR Stats man, put out a stat about yellow and red cards this week. And one of the most carded teams in the MLR at this point is the Chicago Hounds, right? And conversely, by the way, they're the least penalized team, right, overall. But they have the most cards. And a mate of mine here, shout out to Jumbo, Jumbo said to me, he goes, so what do they need to do to adjust? Why is that? And I looked at the data, and it's what I thought it was, high tackles. And I said they need to practice and work on their tackle height, in that short contact zone where you're going to initiate a tackle. You need to quickly adjust that tackle height and get your shoulders down below that chest line, right, to get that low tackle. So absolutely, Scott Lawrence crew should be looking at this. But I guess here's the question: why look at the MLR from an Eagles perspective? How many MLR officials are actually going in and officiating international matches, or will be on the whistle this summer in July and in August, and then again in November, right? So again, it goes back to my point, why look at the MLR in this way and draw? It's almost like he's trying to draw swords with the officiating crew. Again, I don't know why. It just, I can't explain it, and I don't have an answer, and I'm curious as to what people think.
All you, Trent. Yeah.
Yeah. I think the one thing he was openly critical of them last year. If you listened I can't remember when he did an interview, if it was after the PNC or after November, basically said there were significant issues around the breakdown and the fact that MLR players and the way they were approaching the breakdown and the way they were being reffed by international referees was just, those were not congruent things. They were things where it was causing a lot of issues, and there was higher penalty counts as a result of, effectively MLR players getting away with a lot of things that they couldn't get away with at the international game. And the only thing I can think of, Rob, to answer your question is to say he obviously did that to move the needle because he's trying to. He has a job to do, and that ultimately is the Eagles men's 15s program. So I look at it and say, what is he trying to get them to do this time? Is it an issue of he wants more equal penalties across a broad cross section of the players? Is it specific positions he's targeting? But I wonder if it isn't that he is glancing ahead to the July, August, September, and November windows and saying we need to have our guys playing a certain way and understand that they're being reffed a certain way to be prepared for those international games. And let's be honest, every egg is in the basket of qualifying for the World Cup this year. So I'm guessing that's probably at least playing a role in it, saying he's looked. What he didn't say is he didn't say that he hasn't looked at international, the rest of the international reffing community. And maybe that's what he's saying, is that there are some things in there that he's seen in some of that other analysis where they want to see that move happen now when we're sitting at week 6, week 7. He wants that move to be made now by the MLR officials to get these guys prepared to be able to play the international windows in July and August.
Now it's interesting because, initially as you're talking about that, in my head, I'm thinking, well, that would make sense, except the narrative that he presented doesn't really put it on the backs of the players that we must adapt to officials and we must be better at the breakdown, and we have to train players to be better at the breakdown as we prepare for international matches. The way he presented it, it almost like was put on the backs of the officials, like it was the officials that were calling a game that was rather odd. Now, the last statement you make is a little bit more congruent in that he's saying, if what he's really saying is the MLR and the officials that referee these matches have to be more consistent with international officials and the processes that they use and the how they call matches and the way they see things, so that our players, Canadian and American, are better prepared come July, come August, come November. That would make sense, right? To me, that would make sense. I think the message could have been sent in a little different way then.
Well, he also chooses LinkedIn, which is not exactly the moving point where everybody logs in to look at where their buddies moved jobs yesterday. And by the way, Scott Lawrence has a riveting post about referees and potential biases in the referee game.
But that's not what that's. I think it's the perfect place to post those analytics, because a lot of people post analytics on LinkedIn. But what I'll say is he could have phrased it better, because what I think he's trying to show is that we decided to look at this as something we talked about, and this is how the data laid out. How he should have ended it is how they're going to use the data. We're looking to use this data again to prep ourselves so that when we do run into a United States official or an international official or a Canadian official, we can be the most efficient team. We can make sure we're doing what we need to do to prepare to work with those officials. That's how he should have phrased it. He did not phrase it that way. I don't think it was a swipe at officials. I think it was, this is what we looked at. This is the data that came out of the 5 weeks. Because he doesn't go into anything else after his statement. He just says the chart on the left has no numbers. It shows this. The chart on the right shows that. And these are the 3 things we saw in the first 5 weeks. He doesn't say, Marquise Goodwin is a terrible referee based on this data I put out. You know what I mean? So I think people, while being transparent is good, clarify your statement a little bit, because people are going to take it and run with it. And I think, if you ask an MLR official about this, they're going to say no comment really quickly.
Yeah, well, and that's just it, is control your own narrative so that people don't take control of it. And speaking of which, connected with that, why LinkedIn? I thought, Scott, you hit the nail on the head. But let me take it one step further. LinkedIn is not the place you really make a shit post. So it's taken a little bit more seriously if posts are made in that form of social media. If you post it on Twitter, if you post it on or X, or if you post it on Insta, if you post it on Facebook, then it could be deemed as a shit post. But because it's a professional social media page, it's taken a little bit more legitimately. And so I think that's why he uses it as his vehicle to drive his message rather than some of the others, because it'll be taken professionally and not at a much lower level, which I think is an interesting conversation in and of itself.
And let me just tell you, there's reactions and comments. I'll tell you some of the people who reacted and commented. John Poland, an MLR player. Tom Caceres, professional rugby player. Bill Baker, our buddy Bill at
Eagles Overseas.
There you go. Sorry. Paul Mullen, our buddy Mikey Lash, former MLR referee. Nick Chavetta, who else? Our boy Chrissy Shade. So Chicken DeBluis,
DeBluis, yeah.
It's there's a lot of rugby people on LinkedIn because a lot of them have, jobs. But I think those people who are on LinkedIn are expecting, I think you're right, they're expecting to see, this is the analytics. This is the conversation. It's not the, Free Jacks Rangers shit talking meme post, they're not posting memes on LinkedIn, so I think you're right. I think it's more of a professional, and our girl Christina agrees. There we go. LinkedIn might spark more constructive comments versus troll comments. Exactly.
Very true.
I think you hit the nail on the head with that one. And there was one, and I lost it, of course. Sorry. I lost the comment. I don't know if it got removed or whatever, but somebody had a good comment when I saw it 2 weeks ago about the Canadians. There's no Canadian 9s, right? So they're not going to be penalized. I don't think there's a starting Canadian 10, so they're not going to be penalized. So the Canadian on Canadian penalization is going to be, again, I'm not sure. Those data points are going to be so small. Maybe you should lump. I would say North American on North American would be a better lump. Now that I'm thinking about it, I know I said lump them in with international, but I think if you did North American versus international, I think you get a better sense of what the analytics are going to be, because most likely a Canadian referee is going to referee closer to a United States referee. They're almost interchangeable here with our unions and the way we're playing, right? So you would assume they would have the same, they would be doing the same things to the same people. I mean, I got to be honest. If I was refereeing, and who do I want to call out here? Let's call out Butcher. And I knew Butcher, I'd penalize the shit out of him just because it's funny. Again, I'm going to be honest. Every line out throw would be not straight.
So. But interestingly, going into the balance, you have 9 U.S. officials, 8 Canadian, 6 international that are in the referee pool in the MLR. So even then, because you have a slightly more U.S. officials than you do Canadian international, you're obviously, that's going to skew your data, especially early on with only 6 weeks of data having been collected, and not all officials having their full complement of schedules throughout the whole season. So again, going back to the point I made about Cat Roach, with just 2 matches officiated during that 6-week period.
Well, I think I would like to see the comparison, what they saw week 6 or end of week 5 to the end of week 10.
Yeah.
So the Butcher would take. I don't know. He's had the opportunity to hit me before, and he hasn't done it. Andy Ellis has caused me more physical damage than Dylan. Got to be quite honest. Andy Ellis one time. It's had to be 2023. I didn't realize he was in town. Went to a ironworkers practice, And I'm sitting there, and then all of a sudden I'm just on the ground because Andy jumped on my back, unbeknownst to me, scared the living shit out of me. Couldn't get up for about 10 minutes because my back was all screwed up. Because, you know, a 40-year-old New Zealander jumped on my back. That's how it is. But yeah, no, I think there's some interesting data. And I think, like I said, I want to see week 10 versus week 6 or week 5, whatever this was, and what those extra matches have, if they change the assumptions or not.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. It'd be interesting. I think they've got to look hard at the end of the season at not officials or the way officials officiated matches. I think one of the biggest causes for concern, and it may be a conversation for later on, but a lot of fans have been pretty upset about TMO and just the impact that TMO is having upon the ball and not the ball and play minutes, but the amount of time consumed over the course of a match to review TMO and go back, the frequency at which they're going back and looking at, foul play, in terms of, going back minutes, and then whether or not they should be able to go back prior to, to a scoring play after the conversion's already been made. And a lot of fans are upset by that. But, and I think that would be
read the fucking law, Rob. Read the fucking law.
I know what the law says.
They can take it back until they can take it back to the restart kick. So what are people bitching about for? It's been in law for 2 fucking years. No, I'm not mad at you. I'm just I'm saying people were like, ugh. I'm like, it changed 2 fucking years ago. Where the fuck were you guys?
And they have to keep in mind that I think I've talked to Marquise a little bit on the side, but internationally they have like 30 cameras angles that they can use to review. And they probably have 4 or 5 people up in the booth reviewing those critical plays, right? And so they can get that process much faster, whereas the MLR only has a few camera angles, and we know that sometimes their comms don't always work. And so it may be a little bit more difficult to get to a TMO in a timely fashion because technologically we don't have the advantages of the international game or what they do at the international level.
And not even just the international game, Rob. I mean, you go to a French top 14 game, Canal has cameras everywhere, right?
Right.
I haven't been to a Premiership game in years, so I can't comment that. But
they're everywhere. They're everywhere.
I was at 3 top 14 games last year. They've got cameras everywhere, and that's the biggest difference. The MLR is not at that level, and likely won't be for a while. And so that's where I think if there is an objection to the TMO, and that'd be the one thing I would say that is a challenge for the TMOs because they're never dealing with optimal angles. So to say, well, geez, you're less than the international game, which obviously has a huge amount of cameras. But even like if you watch a lot of top 14, you watch Premiership, you watch URC, there's just not that same level of not that same level there. So.
Well, our girl Christina is saying fix the mics there. I do have to say, NOLA's a weird fucking place. When New York played over at Coney Island, it's a weird place. Those, NOLA's people don't realize NOLA's way below sea level. When weather comes in, it'll knock down radio waves. So we saw that, I think, with Marquise. I think it was week 1 or week 2. He was at NOLA, and he couldn't hear the TMO official, and the TMO official kept cutting out. And at a certain point, he had to go speak to the AR because the AR official could hear the TMO official, to get the communication. I think the next question, really, besides this analytics, and at what point does a referee get reprimanded if they have these high impact decisions all the time? And I think this is taking over sports, right? They talk about in football, why did the referee, throw the flag? He should have kept the flag in his pocket because, it's the last 2 minutes. They're doing the automatic ump now in baseball, and even in rugby, we'll talk about the Exiles match. I heard a lot of people bitching about the call for the Exiles in week 1. They lost on an intentional knock, and some people are like, "Well, who knows if the wing out wide would have caught it?" That's not the point. If you throw one hand out, it's an intentional knock on. Mm-hmm. There's not a tackler. If there's not another player out there who could have tried to tackle that player that would have received the ball and they would have walked in, it's a fucking penalty try. I was there live watching it. Does it suck to lose that way? Absolutely. But if you're going to throw one hand out, you run the risk of that being called. You know, I don't know what to tell you. It was the absolute correct call. The ball did not hit the ground. It just, you know, people are like, oh, the pass was forward. I got to be honest. Every pass looks forward on television, in my opinion. You can nitpick every pass, in my opinion. And as we've talked, I think Marky's Goodwin has said on the show, he's like, you're not there at ground level to see the motion of the game to say, yes, it looked like a forward pass, but at the time it left his hands, it wasn't, you know, and the momentum carried them forward. So it looks like it was forward. Right. So again, you have referees making correct decisions and the people are bitching about it left and right. I'm tired of kind of the divisiveness. She made the referee made a high impact decision. It was the correct call. Spoke to her AR to say, was there anybody over there that would have tackled the player if they got the ball? They both nodded no. She went and she gave the friggin' penalty try. That's all you needed to do.
Sounds like she went through the process, but I'll say this. I think in sports in general, because of the ability to rewind and replay, because of the ability to have so many camera angles, because of technology, as a consumer, especially in America, as a consumer of sports, we've gotten so used to try to get it perfect and that attempt to get calls perfect that it's gotten in the way of the flow of the game to the point where it does have the ability to ruin the game because we expect perfection out of a human element, right? Do we expect players to play a perfect game? No, I think that would be unrealistic. You know, whether it's Tom Brady, you know, passing or Ray Lewis making all of his tackles. I don't think we can expect perfection out of players, and nor do I think we can expect perfection out of officials. And
no, I'm not expecting perfection.
I know, but my point being is that because we're able to go back and review and look at these, and they try to get everything right, you know, through TMO and review, it's still an imperfect process because you have a human element. Whether it's that TMO official in the booth or the guy on the side on the run and touch, or whether it's that person in the guy or gal in the middle, you know, you have a human element, and anytime you have a human element, there's going to be an opportunity for error, and as a result, but yet we expect that to be perfect, and I just think we need to knock that off. We need to stop expecting perfection out of officials because it's not going to happen.
One other thing that rugby really, if you think about rugby versus all other sports, I believe it has the least amount of active officials per amount of players on the field or court or whatever it is of any sport that there is, right? I mean, if you think about a hockey game has 2 linesmen and 2 officials. Mm-hmm. Basketball is now almost all 3 officials, right? And there's 10 players. There's 10 players out there, granted in a smaller space that you're dealing with, 10 players that they're watching. You've got 30 players out on that pitch, and you're trying to control them with 1 ref and 2 touch judges. And that is asking a lot of anybody. And granted, the TMO is having a role, and that's helping, right? But you know, that's the one thing I keep wondering if at some point that isn't going to be addressed, because you know, the reality is that is asking an absolute. That's asking a lot of a single individual to just be involved in all those different positions. And frankly, even if they just added a second assistant judge, and that person, for example, could be a scrum specific judge, where their main job is set piece judge that just focuses on that area. You know, that could
you two planned this.
Oh, really? I wonder who's been saying that for 6 years. I wonder who's saying that they should partner with KFC and Segway to be the 5th match official called the scrum specific official, and they've had to have played a certain amount of years in the front row, and they come out on their Segway and they just officiate the other side of the scrum, whatever side the middle official is on, and once the scrum is over, they walk back to the sideline, get on their Segway, and go back and eat their KFC. See, Rob, it's starting to take hold. After years, it's starting to take hold.
I'd like to keep them out there the full game, Scott. But you know, that being said, I think that'll be the interesting part at some point. I mean, you always have to remember that rugby is the most amateur of the games that we watch now, right? I mean, it was amateur from '96, and so a lot of this evolved. A lot of the things that even today, there's some things that go back to the amateur roots, and you know, in a professional game, where gambling is important. And as you know, as the way the NFL is, gambling is huge, and gambling is going to become more and more important. And there's no doubt that that could happen with the MLR. At what point are people going to say, why do we only have one official out here when you've got 30 guys running around this pitch?
Yeah, and it's interesting you make that point, because you go back to football, and any of the officials on the football field can throw a flag, right? But only one individual can actually call for a foul play unless it comes from TMO. Your ARs typically don't actually initiate that call for foul play. They might say, hey, I had an offsides, or they might communicate it in some way to the person on the whistle, but that doesn't necessarily mean the person on the whistle is going to listen to him, which is, I think, a valid point in and of itself. Is, we know that in football that there are officiating crews, people that work together consistently in a game out and game by game basis, if you will. And so they're used to the flow of the game. They're used to how they call things. You're used to communicating with one another. And because of that, it makes it easier when you work with somebody so consistently to know and feel trust and comfort when you are an assistant, to call into that individual and say, hey, I saw X, Y, and Z. We need to stop play, or we need to, you need to call a foul. There's a trust factor there. And I know it does help to work with somebody consistently in order to develop that relationship and develop that trust, so that you can feel confident that when you make that call, it's going to be the right call if you have to stop play. If you haven't worked with somebody, or it's not somebody you trust or have established rapport with, it's going to be less likely that when the AR comes into the middle and says, hey, I see foul play, that they're going to go, okay, I'm going to blow that whistle and stop the match, or I'm going to call advantage, or whatever have you. So I think that's an important piece too, is developing that rapport between the ARs and the person on the whistle.
So we're going to wrap up here. So we'll start with Trent. Trent, just on the topic as a whole of these analytics, if you just want to give your final thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I think at some point we're probably going to get a follow-up to this, and I'll be curious what that follow-up is from Scott, because I think, to your point, Rob, he's trying to move the needle somehow, some way, and I'm curious what that is. We don't know for sure, but I have a feeling it might not be the last time we hear something or see this sort of analysis being done by the head of the men's Eagles.
Rob?
Yeah, great point. I'd be more curious to see this data and these statistics on all the officials that have called American matches. That being said, keep in mind, one of the pieces that will be missing from that is, of course, American officials, because American officials don't officiate American matches, right? And if it's a game between America and Canada, a Canadian official won't be on the whistle either. It's only going to be purely an international official. So perhaps that's going to skew to the data, and perhaps that's why Scott is doing this now, is because there is an opportunity, a platform and a mechanism to talk about and discuss internationals versus Canadians versus Americans and how they call games. And then that sets the table, as you said, Trent, for later on, another message that's going to follow up from this, and it's going to actually move the needle with regard to how America and the United States and the Eagles will, proceed forward as we head into the international window and look for qualification for 2027.
Listen, I think it's interesting to look at. I think we need more data. I think Rob and Trent are correct as far as we are going to look at every avenue possible to better prepare the team, make ourselves more aware of what's going on. And in the vein of all my my NASCAR fandom, the famous saying in NASCAR is, if you ain't cheating, you ain't trying. And not to say Scott's cheating, but my point being, you should look for every angle that you can win at a certain point to have a better match. If that means looking at the officials and figuring out some type of analytics that can help you because the official is an international official or American or Canadian, then that's what you need to do to help you win the match. That's within the rules. But again, I want to see week 10 what these stats were and kind of get a comparison from Scott, hopefully, and we'll kind of go from there. But guys, I think it's an interesting topic. I have a feeling we'll be talking about this again, especially maybe before the internationals coming up in July, right? July 19th, DC is the doubleheader.
Yep.
So we'll see, and I'm sure we'll talk about this again. I'm Scott, the big guy Ferrara, for Rob the Hammer Hammerschmidt, our boy Double A Trent Adams. We'll see you all next week.